symmetrically into its own footprint. We have to remove those, at least the core columns, if not the perimeters as well. 24 core columns within 1/10 of a second of each other. These columns have to be taken out. Any deviation in that pattern, the building will begin to tip, like in a normal or a asymmetrical, chaotic, a natural process. How fast is this building falling? Is it falling at free fall? Well, let's listen first of all to Shyam Sunder, who states,
a free fall time would be an object that has no structural components below it. The collapse analysis shows that same time that it took for the structural model to come down from the roof line all the way for those 17 floors to disappear is 5.4 seconds. It's about 1.5 seconds, or roughly 40% more time for that free fall to happen. And that is not at all unusual, because there was structural resistance that was provided in this particular case.
So in the draft report, we have the denial of free fall and the manipulation of the mathematics of this building's fall, which has been corrected by high school physics teacher David Chandler, subsequent to this treatise by Shyam Sunder.
We can measure the downward acceleration of Building 7 by video frame analysis. I used a magnifying glass to place markers on the corner of the building on each frame. From this, we can get a data table and various graphs. The slope of this graph indicates acceleration, which is shown here to be about minus 10.279 plus or minus 0.6. Free fall in a vacuum is minus 9.8 in these units. That falls within the margin of error of this measurement. In other words, the rate of fall of Building 7 in the first few seconds is indistinguishable from free fall in a vacuum.
And confronted with this information, there was nowhere for
Mr. Sunder
to go
admitting free fall.
So he comes back in the final report and states,
and let me quote, a free fall descent over approximately 8 stories at gravitational acceleration for approximately 2.25 seconds.
So this is about 100 feet of this building's fall. You can see it gaining downward momentum, in fact. So what does Shyam Sunder do with this admission? Nothing. Does he acknowledge the implications of a free-falling building with no resistance under it? No. He states that it's consistent with what's observed. It's consistent with
results of their global analysis.
The computer model that they've created. It's not consistent at all, as a matter of fact. It's direct evidence of explosive controlled demolition, in fact.
Can I just add a point here? When a column is buckling, the minimum, bare minimum, absolute minimum resistance. When a column buckles, the absolute minimum resistance it will give is 25%. There's engineering data on this for many years, many decades. So with the minimum resistance of 25% of the intact column strength, if those columns had a bare minimum of a 2-to-1 factor of safety, which would be absolute minimum, that building could not fall in a natural way at any greater than half the rate of gravity. So the fact that it's falling in free fall means those columns are gone. There is no structural integrity. It cannot happen naturally. There's no chance. And nobody will ever produce a test to show that, because that could happen with a structure with any kind of integrity, because it can't happen.
And let's see what happens when we have the total dismemberment of the steel structure. It falls like a house of cards. A 47-story steel frame, moment-resisting perimeter building, a very strong column-to-beam connections, very rigid, falls to just 4 stories. Remember, buildings that fail structurally in natural processes fall over, not straight down like a house of cards. Do we have sounds of explosions heard by witnesses?
Mr. Sunder again.
Which is the equivalent sound to a gunshot blast standing right next to a jet plane engine, and more than 10 times louder than being in front of speakers at a rock concert at least half a mile away. Although such a blast could be heard a mile away, there were no witness reports of such a loud noise.
In fact, controlled demolitions can be they can reduce their audible signature by using smaller and more numerous explosives as well as insulative shielding around them. Or they can use a different technology. In a deceptive controlled demolition, one might use an incendiary, which we'll be looking at in a moment. Speaking of no witnesses, who's this?
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing, when we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor. I heard some more explosions.
What sort of sound?
Like a boom. Like an explosion.
And more than one?
Yes. We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. When we get outside, a police officer comes to me and says, you have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run.
No witnesses?
And the whole time you're hearing boom, 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 boom. So, I think I know an explosion when I hear it, you know. I was real close to Building 7 when it fell down, and I don't know, but that didn't sound like just a building falling down to me while I was running away from it. There's a lot of eyewitness testimony down there hearing explosions. I didn't see any reason for that building to fall down the way it did, and a lot of guys should be saying the same thing.
No witnesses?
And then it was like another 2-3 seconds, you heard explosions. Like, boom! It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when in compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
No witnesses?
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something? You gotta get back.
Do we have enormous pyroclastic clouds of pulverized concrete? We'll have to refer to the DVD for that section. All this is direct evidence of explosive destruction. Fire is not available to account for any of it, really.
Mrs. Under.
Is that the partial or total collapse of a building due to fires is, first of all, an infrequent event.
Infrequent because we have a 100,000-ton heat sink in the case of the World Trade Center Twin Towers and half that in most other high-rises. They don't fall because this heat is conducted away from its source so that the structural steel never achieves its 1200 degree Fahrenheit half-strength critical temperature rating. Again, we have about 100, almost 100 high-rise fires, not one of which has ever collapsed in a steel frame fire. Not this one, which is fully engulfed in flames in Building 5 at the World Trade Center. It didn't come down. Nor this one. But this one came down, World Trade Center 7, with small fires on one side, isolated pockets, and a lot of smoke, interestingly enough, on the other side, falling completely into its own footprint 4 stories high.
Mr. Jonathan Barnett, forensic fire protection engineer, unable to properly examine the evidence. They were trucking it away.
Normally, when you have a structural failure, you carefully go through the debris field, looking at each item, photographing every beam as it collapsed and every column where it is in the ground, and you pick them up very carefully and you look at each element. We were unable to do that in the case of Tower 7.
Now, that's a startling admission from a member of the FEMA team, given that FEMA was in part or directly responsible for the systematic destruction of evidence at 400 truckloads a day shipped to China for recycling before their report came out in May of 2002, citing that